September 11th, 2001. A day that shall live on in infamy. A brutal terrorist attack shook the world on this day. On top of the horror of the attacks, shortcuts and budget cuts led to the untimely demise of thousands of innocent people. On paper, the Twin Towers should have withstood the flames and the magnitude of the impact. But in reality, the Twin Towers did not meet the building code standards of the time. The first glaring issue is the fireproofing. Instead of building the towers with built-in fire retardant, a fireproofing was sprayed onto the outside of the steel beams. The fireproofing that was used on the steel beams of the World Trade Center was blown off during the initial impact of the plane. This left the steel beams unshielded from the jet fuel fires that raged on after the impact. Without fireproofing, the jet fuel fires compromised the structural integrity of the beams, causing them to bend and later collapse under intense pressure. In the video shown, National Geographic conducted a test to show how quickly unprotected steel beams melt when exposed to intense heat from the fires caused by jet fuel. The test showed that in less than 5 minutes, the beam had collapsed due to heat much sooner than its original 2,600-degree melting point. In regard to the World Trade Center terrorist attacks, this test is only representative of a single steel beam and does not show how long it actually took for the collapse to occur on September 11th. Because there were dozens of beams in the impact zone, the heating and collapse of just a few steel beams would not cause the collapse of the entire building. It took 56 minutes for the majority of the steel beams to fail before the South Tower collapsed. On the left, we have an unprotected column. On the right, we have a fireproofed column. As evidenced by the simulation shown, the need for adequate fireproofing is essential to the survivability of any structure. The unprotected column would buckle in just 65 minutes of gradual, non-jet fuel-induced heat increase. The protected column stays well within its acceptable temperature range well after the 102-minute mark. The second issue relates to the people on the inside of the towers. The evacuation measures that were put in place played a big role in the demise of hundreds of people. The first problem is that there was no emergency lighting. Without a source of light, it was almost impossible to find the stairwells necessary to evacuate the building. Another problem was the general lack of knowledge of emergency evacuation routes and the lack of elevators due to the crash. For the most part, the people in the tower did not know where they needed to go to get to the stairwells. This led to mass confusion as people scrambled to escape. The final problem was the width of the stairs. The stairs were constructed shorter in width than what the current building codes required. This created crowded stairwells as the people tried to move through an area that was intended to support less people. This video shows how crowded the stairs could become. Firefighters and rescue workers would get fatigued climbing up the stairs. When they stopped to rest, they created another obstacle to the already crowded stairwells. This made it increasingly difficult for the firefighters who were moving down the stairs, especially if they were assisting a survivor. First responders found it increasingly difficult to communicate with the ground floor department commanders from inside the towers. Communications were in a dreadful state because of the lack of amplifiers and signal boosters. This issue sealed the fate of many firefighters and policemen when none of them were able to receive word to evacuate the building before it collapsed. The new One World Trade Center has a signal booster running from top to bottom of the building, allowing first responders to communicate much better than on September 11th. Here we can see the addition of shockproof plates onto the base of the structure of the Freedom Tower. The Freedom Tower is built to withstand attacks from both planes and ground-based explosives. Though the attacks on 9/11 were horrendous, it was a day that taught us valuable lessons. Today, the buildings are built to a better building code. Building codes today require that buildings plan for a mass evacuation. For the new One World Trade Center, also known as Freedom Tower, this means an abundance of additional safety features. At the ground level, the tower is built upon a pedestal. The pedestal that the building is founded upon is 200 feet by 200 feet, the same measurements of the original World Trade Center, rising to a height of 186 feet, and it is designed to absorb and deflect a blast from even the largest vehicular bombs. Even the stairs are designed in excess of New York's building codes and built to prevent the issues presented by the 9/11 attacks. They are 50% wider than required, which not only allows more people to exit down them at the same time, but they also allow for people in wheelchairs to be transported down them as well. Included in the stairwell design, at every landing is an area of refuge, where people who are restricted to the wheelchairs are able to wait for firefighters or other rescue personnel. These new staircases are also internally pressurized to keep smoke out. Another new feature is the inclusion of directly-to-exit staircases that exit to the street instead of the lobby. For first responders, there is also a separate stairwell that includes a fire and waterproof emergency elevator so responders can reach higher floors to operate. Additionally, safety features around the world have become prominent in the post-9/11 years. For example, the 7 World Trade Center has bomb-deflecting windows. The windows are flexible, allowing them to deflect and disperse energy from a blast. The energy waves deflect in all directions, protecting the building from any damage. Newer buildings are also designed with additional reinforcement rods. In the event of a support column collapse, the reinforcement rods will allow the structure to support more weight than before. Today's building codes also require that buildings minimize flying debris. In the case of an attack, the building's design would limit the amount of debris being projected by directing it harmlessly towards the ground. Finally, new codes set standards for how the buildings should be laid out. The buildings should provide multiple routes for evacuation. These routes should be clearly labeled and easy to locate. After 9/11, these escape routes became bigger and often interconnected to provide the maximum amount of people a path out of the building. Although we will never forget what happened on September 11th, 2001, we can rest assured that no matter what is to come in the future, the world is doing its best to prepare for any eventuality, as evidenced by the features and improvements made by the Freedom Tower. The world now understands that there is a threat to civilians all over the globe, and in the days since the 9/11 attacks, there has been an international movement to make all buildings and cities safer from catastrophe. 2,753 lives were lost at Ground Zero. The names of those 2,753 are engraved in stone at the Ground Zero Memorial in New York City. The efforts of those who are dedicated to making our lives safer will not bring back those we have lost, but they will ensure that we all have a safer future to look forward to.